I spent more than 20 years of my life sitting across from the wealthiest men in the world, asking them one question that almost nobody else thought to ask. Not how they made their money. Everybody asks that. I wanted to know why money stayed with them when it seemed to leave everybody else. And what I discovered was something so unexpected, so deeply hidden in the way ordinary people think and live, that once I understood it, I could never look at money the same way again. And once I share it with you, neither will you. Most people believe that earning money is the difficult part. They believe that if they could simply earn more, their problems would disappear. But I watched men earn fortunes and lose every cent within a few years. I watched families inherit wealth so great it should have lasted generations, only to see it vanish like morning fog under a hot sun. And then I watched others, people who started with absolutely nothing, not a dollar to their name, build empires that their grandchildren still benefit from today. The difference between these two groups had almost nothing to do with intelligence, education, or luck. It had everything to do with invisible forces operating inside their own minds, forces they could not see, forces they did not even know existed. What I am about to share with you is not a list of budgeting tricks or clever ways to save a few dollars each week. This goes far deeper than that. This is about the hidden architecture of your relationship with money, the deep currents running beneath your daily decisions that determine whether wealth flows toward you or drains silently away. And I must warn you, the truth is not always comfortable to hear, because the forces I am going to describe do not operate out in the world where you can see them and defend against them. They operate inside your own mind, in the place where you are least likely to look. Over the course of my life's work, I identified 9 of these invisible forces, 9 patterns that silently push money out of people's lives, year after year, without them ever understanding the real cause. Some of what I will tell you today may sound familiar. Other parts will surprise you. And the 9th force, the final one, is the one that determines whether all the others matter at all. So stay with me through every word, because what comes at the end ties everything together and changes the meaning of everything that comes before it. Let me begin with the first force, and perhaps the most quietly devastating of them all. In all my years of studying successful men, I noticed something peculiar about the people who could never seem to hold on to money. When I asked them what they wanted, they would say they wanted to be wealthy. They would say it with real conviction, real feeling in their voice. But when I pressed further, when I asked them to describe to me in exact detail what their life would look like 5 years from now if everything went according to their plan, something strange would happen. Their confidence would drain away like water from a cracked vessel. Their voice would go soft and uncertain. They would speak in vague terms, as though they were describing a dream that belonged to someone else, not to them. And in that moment, I knew the truth about them. These people did not actually believe wealth was meant for them. They were wishing, not deciding. And I can tell you from decades of experience that those are two entirely different things, and the distance between them is the distance between poverty and fortune. A wish is a thought with no weight behind it. It floats through the mind and changes nothing in the world. A decision, a true decision, reaches down into the very foundation of a person's character and rearranges everything from the ground up. It changes how a person walks, how they speak, what they will tolerate, and what they refuse to accept. Andrew Carnegie explained this to me more clearly than anyone else ever could. He said the men who build great fortunes are rarely the most talented or the best educated. They are the men who made a firm and irrevocable decision about what they intended to achieve and then simply refused to let the world talk them out of it. He told me that most people spend their whole lives waiting for the world to give them permission to succeed, and that permission never arrives because the world does not hand out permission. You must seize it for yourself. If there is a quiet voice somewhere inside you, perhaps one you have carried since childhood, that whispers wealth is for other people, that people in your situation do not get to live that way, I want you to hear me now. That voice is not wisdom. It is the accumulated echo of every limitation you were ever taught, every time someone told you to lower your expectations, every failure that left its mark on your confidence. And it is that voice, not your income, not your circumstances, that is the first reason money never stays in your life. But silencing that voice is only the beginning. Because even when a person begins to believe they are worthy of wealth, there is a second force working against them that is just as powerful. And this one took me years to fully understand. I learned early in my research that every single person who built lasting wealth shared one quality that separated them from everybody else. They knew with extraordinary precision what they were building toward. Not a vague wish for more money, not a general feeling that life should be better, a specific, vivid, detailed picture of the life they intended to create, often right down to the dollar amount and the date by which they expected to achieve it. I came to call this definiteness of purpose, and in all my years of study, I never found a single principle more directly connected to lasting financial achievement. Without definiteness of purpose, money behaves exactly like water poured onto a flat surface with no channels and no edges. It spreads in every direction, accomplishes nothing, and eventually evaporates. It drains away through impulse purchases, through things that feel urgent but are not truly important, through 1,000 small, mindless decisions that seem harmless one at a time, but together bleed a person's finances completely dry. I met a man early in my career who earned a perfectly respectable living. By any reasonable standard, he should have been comfortable, perhaps even prosperous. But every single year, without exception, he ended up exactly where he started. No savings, no investments, no forward motion. When I asked him what he was building toward, what great purpose his daily labor served, he looked at me as though the question itself was strange. He said he was working to pay his bills, and there it was, plain as day. His only financial purpose was survival. He had no vision that extended beyond the next month's rent. And because his money had no destination, it followed the path of least resistance, which is always the path that leads to nothing at all. Now think about a man like Henry Ford. When I studied Ford's early years, what struck me was not his mechanical genius. It was the clarity of his vision. Ford did not simply want to make money. He did not even primarily want to build automobiles. He carried inside him a burning, all-consuming purpose that was far larger than personal gain, to put an automobile within reach of every working family in America. He saw farmers walking miles to market. He saw families isolated by distance and bad roads, and he decided, with a certainty that nothing could shake, that he would change that reality. That purpose was so specific, so vivid, so powerfully felt that every dollar Ford earned was pulled toward it the way iron is pulled toward a magnet. His money did not scatter across luxuries and distractions. It concentrated, it multiplied, it built factories, hired thousands, and created entire industries that had not existed before. Not because Ford was luckier than the man I described a moment ago, but because his definiteness of purpose gave his wealth a reason to stay and a clear direction in which to grow. If you want money to remain in your life, you must give it a job to do. You must decide with genuine specificity what you are building, not someday, not when conditions improve, now. What I discovered next surprised even me, because it had nothing to do with how much a person earns or how carefully they manage their budget. And yet I observed this force destroying the finances of men who earned excellent wages, doing its damage so quietly that none of them could see it happening. Most people live in a state of chronic financial fear. They are afraid of not having enough, afraid of losing what little they have managed to save, afraid of making a wrong decision that will unravel everything. And that fear, that constant anxious hum running beneath the surface of their daily lives becomes the very engine that drives money away from them. You might assume that fear would make a person more careful and more protective, and in small measured doses, caution is certainly wise. But what I observed across hundreds of cases was that chronic financial fear does not produce wise decisions. It produces paralysis. It produces hoarding without any real strategy. It causes a man to pass up perfectly sound opportunities because he is too terrified to act. And most dangerously of all, it fills the subconscious mind with vivid images of poverty, of loss, of failure, images which the subconscious then goes to work, bringing into reality with frightening efficiency. Allow me to explain why this matters so profoundly. Through years of careful study, I discovered that the subconscious mind does not care whether a thought is something you desire or something you dread. It does not evaluate. It does not judge. It simply moves toward whatever picture you feed it most consistently and most emotionally. A man who spends his days imagining financial disaster, rehearsing the worst possibilities, bracing himself for ruin, is giving his subconscious mind a set of instructions as clear and detailed as any architect's blueprint. And the subconscious obeys those instructions faithfully, not because it wants to harm him, but because faithful obedience is all it knows how to do. Every wealthy man I studied understood this with perfect clarity. Carnegie practiced it. Edison practiced it. They made a daily discipline of feeding their subconscious minds with detailed images of what they were building, never with images of what they feared losing. This was not daydreaming. It was as deliberate and structured as their business operations. And their subconscious minds responded by guiding them almost invisibly toward the people, the decisions, and the opportunities that built more wealth. I recall a man who came to me in a state of great distress. He had been offered an opportunity to invest in a sound business venture, one that my own analysis confirmed was well organized and promising, but he could not bring himself to act. Every time he sat down to make the decision, his mind flooded with images of losing everything, of being left with nothing, of his family suffering because of his mistake. He asked me what was wrong with him. I told him nothing was wrong with him except that he had spent so many years feeding his subconscious mind with fear that it had become the dominant force in his thinking. The fear was no longer protecting him. It was imprisoning him. And every opportunity that came his way would be rejected by that same internal force until he made the deliberate effort to change what he was planting in his own mind. If fear is the loudest voice in your financial life right now, then I want you to understand clearly what is happening inside you. You are giving your subconscious mind instructions to create the very outcome you dread. And no amount of hard work can overcome a subconscious that has been given the wrong set of plans. But there is something even more subtle at work beneath this, and I want you to pay close attention because this next pattern hides itself in a place where most people would never think to look. Most people spend money to change how they feel, not to build anything lasting, not to invest in a defined purpose, but to buy a few temporary minutes of relief from stress, from boredom, from the quiet ache of feeling like they are falling behind. I watched men with perfectly good incomes live in perpetual financial struggle, and when I studied their habits closely, the cause became painfully obvious. Every time they felt inadequate or restless or anxious, they reached for a purchase the way a weaker man reaches for a vice. A new suit they did not need, a meal at a restaurant they could not honestly afford. Something, anything, to signal to the world that they were succeeding. The relief lasted minutes. The financial cost lasted months. And so the cycle repeated itself. Endlessly, each purchase a desperate attempt to fill a hollow space that money was never designed to fill. This is what I came to understand as the confusion between building wealth and performing it. The man who buys luxuries he cannot afford is not becoming richer. He is acting a part on a stage for an audience of acquaintances and strangers who pay far less attention than he imagines. Every dollar spent on that performance is a dollar that could have been compounding quietly, building the kind of real, unshakable security that no possession can ever provide. The truly wealthy men I studied lived with a simplicity that would astonish most people, not because they were miserly or joyless, but because they had discovered something far more satisfying than consumption. They had discovered the deep, sustaining pleasure of watching something meaningful take shape over years of patient, purposeful effort. Their sense of worth came from what they were creating, not from what they were buying. and that single shift in orientation from spender to builder determined whether money stayed in their lives or passed through their hands like sand. Now, the fifth force I identified strikes at the very foundation of how most people earn their living. And I must be direct with you because what I am about to say contradicts nearly everything most people were taught as young men and women. Most people know only one way to earn money. They trade their time for a wage. They repeat this exchange every week, every month, every year for the full duration of their working life, never once questioning whether another method exists. And because their income is permanently chained to their hours, it has a hard ceiling that they can never break through. But their expenses, their responsibilities, the financial demands that life places on them, those things have no ceiling at all. Over the years, the gap between what they can earn and what life requires grows wider until money becomes a source of constant anxiety rather than the freedom it was supposed to provide. The men who built enduring fortunes understood something fundamentally different. They understood that trading time for wages is only the first step on the journey, the apprenticeship, not the destination. At some point, if a person ever hopes to achieve genuine financial independence, they must learn to create value that works even when they are not working. A business built on sound organization and capable people, investments that compound steadily over years, an idea or a product that continues delivering value long after the initial effort has been completed. I observed this understanding clearly in Edwin Barnes. When Barnes first traveled to meet Thomas Edison, he arrived looking more like a tramp than a future business partner. He possessed almost nothing in material terms. Most men in his position would have been thinking about finding any job that paid a decent wage. But Barnes was not thinking about wages at all. His mind was fixed on something entirely different. He wanted to work with Edison, not for Edison. He wanted to build a partnership, a lasting position of real value that would generate wealth far beyond what any hourly rate could ever provide. And here is what separates Barnes from the millions who merely dream. He was willing to start at the very bottom and stay there for as long as necessary. He swept floors. He performed tasks that had nothing to do with his ultimate goal. He did this not for weeks, but for years, all while holding firmly to his vision of what he was building toward. Most people would have grown discouraged and moved on long before the opportunity appeared. Barnes did not. And when that opportunity finally revealed itself, as it always does for the person who is both prepared and persistent, Barnes was ready to seize it with both hands. The wealth that followed was not the fragile kind that disappears when a paycheck stops. It was the kind that compounds, that deepens, that endures for a lifetime because it was rooted in created value rather than traded hours. If the only method you know for generating income is selling your hours, then you have placed a limit on your financial life that no amount of overtime will remove. You must begin to ask yourself a different question. Not how can I work more, but how can I create value that keeps working after I stop? That single question, pursued with sincerity and persistence, has been the starting point of more great fortunes than I can count. The sixth force is one that most people find difficult to accept because it challenges a deeply held belief about what it means to be self-reliant. But I must share it with you honestly, because ignoring this principle will cost you more than you realize. In all my research, I never found a single individual who built a great and lasting fortune entirely by themselves. Not one. Every enduring achievement I studied was the product of minds working together in genuine harmony toward a clearly defined shared purpose. I called this the mastermind principle, and I came to consider it one of the most powerful forces available to any person seeking wealth or accomplishment of any kind. When two or more minds come together in true harmony, not merely in proximity, but in real alignment of spirit and purpose, something occurs that cannot be explained by simple arithmetic. The combined intelligence of the group becomes something greater, something different in kind than the intelligence of any individual member. Ideas emerge that no single mind could have produced. Solutions to problems that seemed utterly impossible reveal themselves with surprising ease. Blind spots that would have cost a man dearly become visible before they can do harm. and the momentum that builds within such an alliance carries every member forward faster and further than any of them could have traveled on their own strength. But most people never experience this remarkable power. They work in isolation. They guard their plans jealously. They see other people as threats to be outmaneuvered rather than allies to be cultivated. And so they remain permanently trapped within the limits of what one mind can see, never knowing how much they are leaving on the table. If money keeps departing from your life, ask yourself honestly, who are you building with? Who sharpens your thinking? Who holds you to account? Who brings knowledge and perspective that you lack? If the answer is no one, you have identified one of the most important changes you can possibly make. Wealth has never been a solo endeavor, and the person who insists on going alone will always be outpaced by the person who has mastered the art of going together. The seventh principle is one that I believe draws the sharpest line between people who experience temporary success and those who build permanent wealth. And most people discover this truth far too late. Stay with me here, because this is where the difference is made. Most people stop just before the breakthrough arrives. They begin with genuine enthusiasm and real energy. They take the first brave steps. They feel the encouraging warmth of early momentum. And then, as happens to every person who attempts anything of real value, resistance appears. A failure, an unexpected setback, a long, discouraging stretch where effort produces no visible result. And at that precise moment, the moment when one more month of steady persistence would have carried them safely through to the other side, they quit. They convince themselves it was not meant to be. They start something new, something untested, something that does not yet carry the weight of past disappointment, and the cycle begins again. I gave persistence its own place among the principles of success because I believed then, and I believe still, that it is that critical. Persistence is to the human character what carbon is to steel. Without it, every other quality remains soft and unreliable. A man can have burning desire. He can have definiteness of purpose and organized planning. He can have a mastermind alliance of the finest minds available. But if he folds the moment the road becomes steep, none of those advantages will matter. What most people fail to understand, the part that still troubles me after all these years, is that the resistance they encounter is almost never a sign to turn back. Far more often, it is a signal that they are nearing the very thing they have been working toward. Nature seems to have a law built into it that tests people most severely just before it rewards them. Carnegie endured seasons where his steel ventures seemed on the edge of ruin, where creditors pressed and competitors circled, and he held his ground because he understood that difficulty was part of the price of great achievement, not a reason to abandon it. Ford watched his earliest automobile companies fail entirely, fail in ways that would have convinced any reasonable man to try a different line of work. He did not stop. He refined his plan, corrected his mistakes, and tried again with even greater determination. Edison faced setbacks more times in a single year than most men encounter in a full decade of effort. The difference between these men and the millions who are forgotten was never that they were spared hardship. The difference was that they treated every defeat as temporary and every lesson as useful, and they refused with everything inside them to accept any failure as the final word on their ambition. If money has entered your life and then departed, ask yourself with complete honesty, did you hold fast to your plan when everything in you begged you to walk away? Or did you abandon the effort at the first sign of rough weather? Because storms are not what destroy most people's financial lives. What destroys them is the quiet, private decision to stop rowing. The eighth force is deeply personal, and I share it because I watched it silently ruin more promising lives than perhaps any other. Most people are surrounded every single day by influences that keep them poor, not deliberately, not with any malice or ill intent, but the people they spend their hours with, the conversations they participate in, the assumptions and beliefs they absorb from their daily environment, all of these shape their financial thinking in ways they never pause to examine. I witnessed this with heartbreaking regularity throughout my career. A young man full of ambition and genuine ability would share his plans with the people closest to him, and within minutes his vision would be met with doubt, with fearful warnings, with that suffocating phrase I heard more times than I care to remember: "People like us do not do things like that." And slowly, over the course of weeks and months, that young man's fire would diminish and die. Not because his idea lacked merit, not because his plan was unsound, but because the people around him could not see past the walls of their own limitations, and they projected those walls onto him as though they were doing him a favor. The most successful men I studied were remarkably deliberate about their associations. They actively sought out people who thought larger than they did, people whose presence expanded their sense of what was possible rather than shrinking it. They understood that the human mind is like fertile soil, and whatever is planted in it, whether by your own hand or someone else's, will eventually and inevitably grow. If you allow poverty-minded thinking to be planted in your mind every day, through fearful conversations, through envious complaints, through the steady drip of other people's doubt, do not be surprised when poverty is what takes root in your life. This is not about cruelty. It is not about abandoning the people you care about. It is about becoming fully conscious of the mental diet you are consuming and choosing with real deliberation to feed your mind with influences that strengthen your purpose rather than strangle it. The environment you tolerate is the future you are quietly agreeing to accept. And now we arrive at the ninth and final force, the one I have been building toward from the very first word of this lesson. If you have stayed with me through everything I have shared so far, then I believe you are ready for this truth, because this is the force that determines whether all the other 8 matter at all. Most people never make the real decision to change their financial life. They hear a powerful idea. They feel a flash of genuine inspiration. They nod and say to themselves, "Yes, I should do something about this." And then they go home, sit down in the same chair, return to the same habits, think the same thoughts, and live exactly the same life they were living before the idea ever reached them. The insight enters their mind and sits there, inert and unused, fading a little more each day until it is gone entirely. Another year passes. Money comes and money goes. Nothing changes, nothing at all. I will tell you, this was the most painful pattern I encountered in all my decades of research. Not ignorance. Ignorance can be corrected with the right teaching, but the failure to act on what one already knows, the refusal to use wisdom that is sitting right there in plain sight, that is a tragedy I never fully made peace with, because it means the answer was within reach, and the person simply would not close their hand around it. Allow me to speak to you directly now with all the plainness I can summon. Everything I have shared with you in this lesson, every principle, every observation, every story, and every warning is completely worthless if you do not act upon it. Not tomorrow morning, not when you feel ready. I can promise you that you will never feel ready. No one ever does. The decision to transform your financial life is not something you write in a planner or schedule for a better time. It is something you make in a single blazing moment of clarity and total commitment, the way a man steps across a threshold knowing he will never step back through it again. I watched this transformation happen before my eyes more times than I can count. A man would come to me weighed down by years of financial disappointment, years of watching money arrive and depart without ever building anything lasting. And as we talked, I would see something shift behind his eyes. A softness would leave his face. A resolve would settle into his jaw and his shoulders. And he would say, not with trembling hope, but with iron certainty, "I am finished living this way. From this day, things will be different." And from that moment forward, as surely as any law of nature I have ever observed, his life would begin to change. Not because the world rearranged itself around him. The world was utterly indifferent to his decision, but because he changed. His thoughts changed. His daily habits changed. His associations changed. His entire relationship with money and with himself was transformed at the root. And the outward results followed, as they always do, as they always will, for anyone who possesses the courage to make that decision and the persistence to honor it through every trial that follows. The hidden reason money never stays in most people's lives is not one thing. It is a web of invisible forces working together beneath the surface, each one reinforcing the others. A belief buried deep, that wealth belongs to someone else. The absence of a clear and burning purpose for every dollar earned. Fear poisoning the subconscious mind with vivid pictures of failure. The habit of spending to fill an emotional emptiness rather than to build something lasting. A ceiling imposed by knowing only one way to earn. The loneliness and limitation of trying to build wealth alone. The devastating tendency to quit just before the reward arrives. An environment that plants doubt and smallness in the mind like weeds in a good garden. And above all else, the refusal to make a true, irrevocable decision to change. These forces send no warning. They announce themselves with no fanfare. They operate silently, year after year, while the person they afflict searches everywhere for the answer except the one place it has always been, which is inside their own mind. But I want to leave you with the truth that made my entire life's work worthwhile. The truth that kept me going through every difficulty and discouragement I myself faced along the way. Once a person sees these forces clearly, once they understand what has been silently working against them all along and make the deliberate, unshakable decision to change, the results can be nothing short of extraordinary. I have watched men and women go from poverty to genuine and lasting prosperity within a few short years. Not through tricks or shortcuts or fortunate accidents, but by rebuilding, piece by piece, the invisible architecture of how they thought about money, about their own worth, about what they were building, and about what they believed was possible for their lives. The change always began on the inside, in the private territory of their own thoughts and beliefs, long before any outward evidence appeared. And when the outer results did arrive, they came not as a surprise, but as the natural, inevitable consequence of a mind that had been deliberately reorganized for wealth rather than for fear. These principles are not theories I constructed in a quiet room. They are the distilled observations of a lifetime spent in the company of the most accomplished men of a generation. And I can tell you with complete confidence that they work, not for a fortunate few, for anyone willing to apply them with sincerity, with discipline, and with a definiteness of purpose so firm that it leaves absolutely no room for retreat. So let me ask you one final question, not as a teacher standing above you, but as someone who devoted his entire life to this work and who cares with real sincerity about where your road leads from this moment forward. What will you do with what you have heard today? Will you allow it to become another piece of good advice that fades into the background of a busy life? Will you nod, feel a brief warmth of inspiration, and then return to the same patterns, the same fears, the same habits that have kept you exactly where you are? Or will you do something different this time? Will you make the decision, the real one, the deep and permanent one from which there is no turning back, to take full command of your financial destiny starting in this very hour? Money does not stay with people who are not ready for it, and it does not leave people who are. The choice, as it has always been, belongs entirely to you. If this lesson helped you, subscribe to Napoleon Mindset for more timeless principles of success and wealth.